Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 106 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits, but I found that sometimes people can get overwhelmed or feel left out because they don't already have what some consider the requisite knowledge to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. Happy holidays to you all, but an extra special greetings to my current patrons. Justin Bailey, Jesse Clark, Ricky Garvin, Rob Garrison, Forrest Woodward, Aaron Borst, Carla Hoffman, Lyndon Onstead, Julio Herrera, Matthew Saint, and Utuk Zul. I truly appreciate your contributions, which help keep the show going. Remember, it's just $1 per month to join in and get this monthly shoutout, as well as full scripts and audio outtakes. Now, on to the show. No specific question this time. Instead, I'm going to continue my holiday tradition of looking at Santa's appearances in comics. Last year, I looked at the appearances of Santa Claus in DC Comics. This time, we turn our attention to Marvel Comics and the big stories where Saint Nick has shown up. Like last year's episode about Santa, we get into some details that are not appropriate for younger listeners, so bear that in mind before you continue on. Sorry, Lily, you're gonna need to turn this one off now. Okay. Only people who are supposed to be listening left? Great, let's get started. Going back to the beginning, Santa's first few appearances come from the period of time in Marvel's publishing history when superheroes were not the dominant genre in comics. So we get a few short stories where Santa appears, usually in disguise or revealed to the readers at the end, to either gift a good person or go all Scrooge on someone who was not living up to the spirit of Christmas. Nothing has specifically contradicted these stories, which are found in Strange Tales number 34, Journey into Untold Worlds number 34, and Strange Tales of the Unusual number 2. And Marvel has shown that they will readily bring in stories from this era of their history into the modern Marvel universe, so while they could have taken place on different worlds, I'm going to count them for now. Speaking of retconning early Marvel history, we do sort of have one World War II era story featuring Old Saint Nick, but it wasn't actually written and published until 1992. This 2-page story was written and drawn by cartoonist Fred Hembeck in Marvel Age number 109. Marvel Age was a promotional book that mostly featured interviews and other promotional pieces about their upcoming titles, but would also include 1 or 2 short stories in it as well. It uses a framing device of Captain America telling Christmas stories to some children. However, the kids don't want to hear any of the classics, instead asking for a winter tale of Cap's exploits. And so the good captain tells of the time that he and Bucky, along with Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos, were sent by President Roosevelt to free Santa, who had been captured by Hitler in an effort to demoralize the American people. Most of Fred Hembeck's work is played for humor, including this one, and usually doesn't affect continuity in any way, so whether or not this tale is canon is debatable. Assuming it is, and this group did rescue Santa, that would explain Santa returning the favor a few years later, as seen in issue 10 of Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., published in 1969. In that story, what is implied to be Santa's sleigh flying past at the incredible speed necessary to make his deliveries on time distracts one of the hate-monger's henchmen, and he ends up flying his plane into the craft holding a biological weapon set to wipe out New York City. Hate-monger thought that a mysterious attack of that nature would cause nuclear war, allowing him and the representatives of the master race living up in an orbiting satellite to repopulate after the fallout had dissipated. Given the description of this plot, it should surprise no one that the hate-monger was a clone of Hitler himself. As I noted, Santa's presence in the story was only hinted at and not explicitly stated, but since Marvel's official site lists this as an appearance of Santa, I'll do so as well. While there were almost no published stories involving Santa during the entirety of the 1970s, we do get another story from the early 90s that retcons him into that time period. This tale, titled A Miracle a Few Blocks from 34th Street, was drawn by the artist who helped rejuvenate the X-Men concept in the 1970s, Dave Cockrum, and was written by one of the current X-Men scribes, Scott Lobdell, and appeared in 1991's Marvel Holiday Special. In this short story, Cerebro detects, quote, the most powerful mutant ever registered in New York's Rockefeller Center, and both the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants go to investigate, and an inevitable fight ensues in a nearby store. The mutant they detected is Santa himself, who ends the brawl quickly by transforming the evil mutants into action figures. He then erases everyone's memory of the incident and teleports the X-Men back to an untouched Rockefeller Center, with the first Christmas snow falling on New York in years. The ending panel of this story seems to also be the first panel of X-Men number 98, so you can read the two as one seamless story if you want, although other than the location and the Christmas time period, there's not much that ties the two together thematically. The next Santa appearance is probably the most unusual, which will not come as much of a surprise when I tell you what title it was in. Released in December of 1979, the magazine-sized Howard the Duck number 3 was written by Bill Mantlo and drawn by Gene Colan. Howard's original creator, Steve Gerber, used the foul-mouthed fowl to tell political satires and other absurd tales with a deeper message, and that tradition continued here. In this story, we find that Santa has decided to modernize, which includes moving to a gas-powered sleigh after complaints from the ASPCA forced him to find a non-reindeer solution to making his annual deliveries. In addition, the Claus family had built a nuclear power plant to provide electricity for the workshop. Unfortunately, Santa's sleigh hadn't been fully fueled and crashed in Cleveland. Due to the fuel rationing, a real event of this time, Santa was afraid he wouldn't be able to return home, but Howard takes Santa to the cab company he works for and lets him refuel there. In the meantime, taking advantage of Santa's absence is Pinball Lizard, who recruited some trolls, took over the North Pole, and kicked out Mrs. Claus and the elves while Santa was out delivering toys. Speaking of toys, some sentient creations of Santa who live up in the North Pole, along with Howard and the Clauses, are able to retake the workshop, but Pinball Lizard gets away and retreats to the nuclear power plant, run by the true mastermind of this escapade, a former nuclear plant worker who had mutated into a living light bulb named Greedy Killerwatt. The messages in these books were not subtle. When our heroes arrive at the nuclear plant to take it back, Killerwatt threatens to let the core melt down, which, according to the story, would cause the plant to melt all the way through to the center of the Earth, causing its total destruction. Fortunately, Howard, Santa, and the rest of the team triumph, and the main helper elf, Sunquist, convinces Santa to go green in the future, using solar and wind power for all their energy needs. Getting back to a more grounded story, or as grounded as stories involving Santa can get, December 1985's Spectacular Spider-Man number 112, drawn by Mark Beecham, was one of the earliest published stories written by prolific author Peter David, one of my personal favorites. In this tale, a criminal gets a job as a mall Santa, asking the kids he talks to for their addresses to remind him. He continues to scam the kids by showing up at their windows in his Santa suit, asking to be let in, leaving a few empty boxes while looting the house of valuables. One of his victims happens to be the next-door neighbor of Peter Parker, and the child's mother, Bambi, wakes up to find the Santa impersonator stealing her electronics. The burglar threatens Bambi with a gun, which sets off Peter's spider sense, and he changes into his costume and leaps into action. Unfortunately, in the commotion, the burglar ends up getting away and running up to the roof. However, the real, and very angry, Santa is on the rooftop of the apartment building and convinces the impersonator to give up his evil ways. And the next day, Peter finds the man giving away handcrafted toys to children while waiting for the police to arrive, as he called them to confess and let them know where he would be so he could be arrested for his crimes. The criminal also hands Peter a note from Santa that tells him to call his Aunt May, as earlier in the story, a miscommunication had caused Peter to believe Aunt May wanted to spend Christmas alone with her neighbor Anna Watson, Mary Jane's aunt. The issue ends with Peter and his aunt enjoying the holidays together. Santa takes a more active role in the next story, Sensational She-Hulk number 8, written and drawn by John Byrne, during She-Hulk's fourth wall-breaking days. Go way back to episode 8 of this show to hear more about fourth wall breaks in comics, or episode 38 if you want more about She-Hulk's history. Under the name Nick St. Christopher, Santa uses his magical ability to determine who is naughty and who is nice to act as a detective during the non-holiday season. This issue was released in August of 1989. Santa, or Nick as he goes by in the story, helps Jennifer, aka She-Hulk, to gather evidence against a serial killer she is prosecuting in her day job as a lawyer. Throughout this issue, Nick flirts with She-Hulk, and near the end of the issue, a very jealous Mrs. Claus appears to take her husband home, calling She-Hulk a hussy, despite her showing no interest in the white-bearded detective, and leaving behind reindeer manure in Jen's office as a punishment. Nick, however, gave a real present to Jen, telling her to use it on Christmas for something special. A year and a half later, in issue number 36, just a couple of issues after John Byrne's return as the writer and artist after abruptly leaving at issue 8, when Jen is stuck in her She-Hulk form, she does use the present, which allows her to return to her regular human body and spend a normal Christmas Eve with her father. Santa teamed up with Howard the Duck again in his 1997 holiday special, written by Larry Hama with art by Pasquale Ferry. As opposed to the first story with Santa and Howard, there was no political satire in this one-off tale, just a fairly straight adventure, with a pinch of slapstick, as Howard is recruited to help Saint Nick, who has let Hydra take over his operations. No mention was made of their previous, and somewhat similar, encounter, and there's not really much more to say on this one, as it's really not that great of a story, so we'll move on. The late 90s were the time for holiday specials, apparently, as Santa's next appearance was in the Generation X holiday special, published in 1999. In a story titled, Yes, Jubilee, There Is a Santa Claus, written by Joseph Harris and drawn by Adam Polina, the team, out doing their holiday shopping in various locations around town, each runs into Orphan Maker as he searches for a mutant boy that Nanny detected. Nanny and Orphan Maker are a duo who believe their purpose is to find mutant children being raised by human parents and, quote-unquote, save them by killing their parents and raising them instead. During the fight, Jubilee is knocked onto the roof of the house next door, where the mutant that Nanny detected actually lives. Orphan Maker screwed up and took the wrong kid, and finds a sleigh and a reindeer on top of the roof. Jubilee, for obvious reasons, goes inside to investigate and finds a young mutant boy named Matthew has captured Santa, hoping to keep him from delivering presents to the bully that lives next door. Yes, the same one that the villains actually kidnapped. Santa is trying to talk Matthew into letting him go, and with Jubilee's help is able to do so. This is the second story that hints strongly at Santa being a mutant, although the official handbook of the Marvel Universe gives him a more mystical origin. There's a 15-year gap between Santa appearances, as our next story is 2014's Captain Marvel number 11 by Kelly Sue DeConnick and David Lopez. In this story, Carol is captured by two of her villainesses, who want to experiment on her and take her powers. They also have apparently taken a mall Santa and are using him for preliminary experiments to ensure the transfer of powers can be done without hurting the recipient. Captain Marvel is able to free herself and her fellow victim, who, upon being released, transforms from a drunken mall Santa into the real thing. After quickly defeating the villains, Carol borrows Santa's magic sack to collect up some bombs that her captors has set, and safely set them off at a distance. The Santa in this story has almost no dialogue, so we get no explanation for how he was captured or why he was in the guise of a mall Santa, but apparently it was just a case of wrong place, wrong time. Finally, we get to the most recent appearance by the Man in Red, showing up in another book about a man in red, 2018's Deadpool number 7, written by Scotty Young with art by Nick Klein. In this, definitely not for younger audiences, story, Santa doesn't show up one Christmas Eve, and a bunch of angry kids pool their money together and hire Deadpool to kill old St. Nick. The Merc with a Mouth takes the gig and heads up to the North Pole to take out the jolly old elf. Arriving at a very bare Claus residence, he first has to fight off a locked and loaded Mrs. Claus. After disarming her, not literally, although it being Deadpool I feel I have to make that distinction, Wade heads to the workshop to finish the job. The pair are fairly evenly matched, but Deadpool gets the upper hand eventually. Fortunately, he does have enough of a conscience that he can't kill Santa, and in talking to him, Deadpool finds out the reason Christmas was canceled this year was due to a greedy elf named Tinsel, who had been promoted to head elf and ran the organization. Tinsel had suggested to Santa that they outsource to Roxxon some of the manufacturing to reduce costs, but St. Nick refused. That angered Tinsel, who used lies to convince the other elves to leave and go work for Roxxon instead. Deadpool, wanting to keep to the spirit of his contract, having agreed to take out the person who destroyed Christmas, tracks down Tinsel at a Roxxon plant and kills the greedy elf. Returning the other elves back to Santa along with all the toys they had made in the intervening time, Deadpool volunteers to deliver this year's presents, as Santa was not in shape to be seen in public. The issue ends with Deadpool flying the sleigh over a town, dropping presents willy-nilly onto sidewalks, doorsteps, and car roofs, much to the anger of those whose property was damaged by the sudden arrivals. That should cover all the Santa showings in Marvel up to the time of this recording, although other stories tangentially involve Santa, like the time Rhino in a Santa suit fought the Hulk, and I may cover those down the line sometime. Or I could do a Marvel Hanukkah episode. A lot of that depends on you, dear listeners. If there's a question you want answered or topic you'd like covered in a future episode, I'm always looking for those, as well as feedback on the show in general. Feel free to email me any comments or questions to welcome2geektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you'd prefer to remain anonymous. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcome-to-geektown or Twitter @geektownpodcast. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, come join the Patreon at patreon.com/welcome-to-geektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the show, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show, so we can all tell them, welcome to Geektown, population, us. Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips are the copyrighted material, their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.